Hello and welcome to the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture's virtual forum, The Future of Dairy. Firstly, as a reflection of this institution's recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, TIA wishes to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Palawa people, as custodians of the land upon which we meet, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. My name is Rowan Borjevich, and today I'll be assisting in emceeing today's forum. I'm an Industry Development Officer at TIA. Each year, TIA interacts with hundreds of people through workshops, presentations, and field trips around Tasmania. We know that not everyone is able to join us on farm, so we're offering a front row seat in a virtual forum, connecting you with experts as we explore issues relating to the future of agriculture. Just a few housekeeping notes before today's forum gets underway. Your microphone, camera, chat function and raise hand function have all been disabled, so our speakers are not interrupted. But we do really encourage you to ask questions, which can be done at any time by typing them into the Q&A function. You'll see these on your screens. You can ask questions anonymously, and a selection will be answered during the Q&A session towards the end of the discussion. And finally, this forum is being recorded for later access on our YouTube channel. So today we're exploring the future of dairy. In Tasmania, dairy is the largest land-based agricultural sector and contributes over $1 billion to the state economy each year. The industry is based on the sustainable use of our natural resources, and this is a key focus looking forward to the future. In this forum, you will hear from a range of presenters about the challenge of balancing the growth and intensification of the sector with changing consumer expectations and a changing climate. This is a huge topic, and today we're just introducing some key themes to get the conversation started. So I'd like to now introduce our speakers. First up, we have Angelique Korpershoek. Angelique is the chair of the DairyTas board, and through this role encourages the development of a Tasmanian dairy industry that is sustainable, vigorous and dynamic, offering economic and social rewards to dairy farmers and the wider community. Angelique has been farming with her husband Isaac since 2008, and together they run a 350 head dairy farm in the northwest of Tasmania. She's also a qualified veterinarian and has worked in the private practice and industry in the UK and Tasmania. Angelique is also an industry member of TIA's advisory board. We also have Matt Watt, who is the Director for Farm Source at Fonterra Australia and is a member of the Australian leadership team. He leads the team responsible for partnering with Fonterra Australian farmers and managing the supply of milk for their business. Since joining Fonterra in 2010, Matt has held roles with the responsibility for managing all aspects of milk supply and its integration with Fonterra's manufacturing operations. He has a deep dairy know-how across strategy, sales, marketing, R&D, quality, food safety, and sustainability. Today, we also have Dr. James Hills, who's the leader of the Livestock Production Centre at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture. James has a particular interest in variability in farming systems and the use of technology for measuring and managing this variability in the aim to improve the efficiency and sustainability of production. New research in this area will be a focus for the upcoming farmlet trials at TIA's Dairy Research Facility, which has recently received a multi-million-dollar upgrade. We also have Michele Lawrence, who runs Janefield Dairy at Meander, together with her husband, Brian. They purchased the property in 2007, converting it from a sheep farm to a successful dairy business where they now milk 1,100 cows. Their business has been awarded the Tasmanian Dairy Business of the Year award on 2 separate occasions, receiving the award in 2016 and again in 2022. They were also named Australian Dairy Farmers of the Year in 2015. Michele and Brian believe engaging with industry will enable them to be proactive in managing change for the future success of their business. We also have Dr. Megan Verdon, who is a senior research fellow at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture and leads TIA's Animal Production and Welfare Research Group. Megan's research supports livestock systems seeking to manage challenges relating to the resource base, that is the people, the environment and the animals involved. Her current projects include the management of surplus calves and opportunities for cow-calf suckling in dairy systems. Now I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, Angelique, to kick off today's discussion. Thanks, Angelique.
Thanks, Rowan, and thanks for the invitation to be part of today. I'm going to start off today's session by giving an overview of the Tasmanian dairy industry strategic plan for 2022 to 2027. The 5-year plan was prepared by DairyTas after wide industry consultation, including contributions by the TFGA, TIA, Dairy Australia, the DairyTas board, milk processors, and a broad range of agricultural service providers, and of course, Tasmanian dairy farmers from across the state. Just like previous plans, it is a whole of industry plan. The plan aims to address what all parties see as the critical issues for the industry over the next 5 years, how we might address them, and what strategies we can use to overcome them. But it also looks at where the industry's been in the past 5 years and celebrates the success and core strengths of the Tasmanian dairy industry. Tasmania has some natural advantages that makes for favourable conditions for dairy farming. And we have good soils, access to water, including growing access to irrigation water, natural biosecurity advantages, and a climate that suits pasture-based dairy systems. And so the vision for this plan encapsulates all of this by stating that we aim to be an adaptive pasture-based dairy industry that all of Tasmania is proud of. But to achieve this and to continue into the future, it's also acknowledged that as an industry we need to be adaptable, we need to be profitable, and we need to be sustainable. The past 5 years has seen the Tasmanian dairy industry grow by 32%, and Rowan's already described what that means for the state of Tasmania. And we've certainly had successive years of record milk production. Farmer confidence through that period has been high, and significant investments have occurred. This is in stark contrast to the national and global declining milk pool. Tasmanian dairy to date has been a positive story, but the challenge going forward is how does the industry retain this confidence and its longevity into the future? There were some clear messages throughout the consultation, and I know a lot of people that are probably attending today contributed to this consultation. The 5 key strategic priority areas that were identified as challenges, but also opportunities for the industry to focus on over the coming 5 years. The first priority is people. The attraction and retention of skilled employees across the sector will be the key catalyst for future success and profitability of the industry. It's about Tasmanian dairy becoming the career of choice. The second priority is business adaptability. Tasmanian dairy farmers are required to be dynamic and adaptable as they face continual change across markets, input costs, the environment, social expectations, and global operating conditions. Farmers need to be equipped with the right tools to combat future challenges, but they need to be profitable to remain viable businesses into the future so as to weather the storms when they occur. The third priority area is sustainability. We acknowledge that we're stewards in our community, our animals, and our natural resources, and that stewardship is critical to the industry's future success. The fourth priority area is market access. There are both advantages and disadvantages to Tasmania being Australia's only island state, and this priority is about making sure that we are competitive and available to new opportunities and markets. And the fifth and final priority is industry promotion. The Tasmanian dairy industry is innovative and vibrant and are massive contributors to our local communities, but we don't promote ourselves well. And so this priority is about taking a proactive approach to making people aware of the importance of dairy to the economy, our health, our lifestyles, and careers. In developing this plan, it was clear from all parts of industry that we want an industry that will be here for generations into the future. And to do that, we need to be sustainable in all forms, in our people, our environment, and our businesses. It's not that where we have come from has not been sustainable, but it is really looking to the future and asking how do we remain a viable industry for our communities, our state, and most importantly, future generations, and one that we can all be proud of. If anyone would like any more details, the plan is available on the Dairy Australia and DairyTas website. Alternatively, you can contact the DairyTas office, and they'll provide you with a hard copy.
Great. Thanks for that, Angelique. Next up, I'd like to hear from Matt, if that's possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Rowan, and thanks for the opportunity to participate today. What I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about history, but obviously the session today is about the future. So I'll talk about sort of our business, where we're focused, and particularly as we think about sort of the broader sector here in Tasmania. A little bit of history. There's a lot of strong legacy predecessing companies and cooperatives that form into what we know as a Fonterra today in Tasmania, which has been partnering with farmers for over 20 years. We collect and process close to half of the state's milk into a couple of processing plants. One of those is over at Wynyard, and the cheese we produce there is exported, high value markets like North Asia, Japan particularly, and in fact the cheese from Wynyard was recently recognised by taking out what they call the Japan Cup. So all of the sort of factories that cheese comes from into Japan annually gets recognised. That of course partners with the other site at Sprayton, where I'm coming to you today, and seeing the poll earlier, I know I don't need to talk to Tasmanians about the value of Duck River butter and how good it is being made here. We also do specialty powders, organics and so forth out of this site. As Angelique touched on, there's an incredibly strong provenance story from Tasmania, lush green pastures, which make it a really attractive proposition for customers and consumers that do want assurances in how their food's produced, that it's safe, reliable, and it comes from a source that identifies from their values. For us, in terms of what we can do sort of within our business, there are a number of targets and ambitions that we've set around waste reduction and the like. So for example, like many, we've got an ambition to be net zero by 2050. We're making good progress on that, reducing carbon emissions by 27% in Australia since 2018, water consumption by 14%. And then if we look at things like waste to landfill, we've halved that since 2019. But clearly from a overall proposition, behind farm gate is a big part of the resource use. And we're increasingly focused on how we can support farmers and support industry in that space. It's important because we do come from a position of relative advantage there. Whilst there's some challenges, again, as Angelique sort of outlined in this space, when we think about our production systems and how they compare with our competitors globally in the Northern Hemisphere, we're 30% more efficient when you look at an emissions measure. So it's a point of relative advantage. Our job is how do we keep ahead of that? So a couple of the programs that we're working on, one of them is the Asparagopsis trial of seaweed. Many of you will have heard of that on Richard Gardner's farm down in Annandale, working with Sea Forest. Since 2020, we've been working on a trial there that the CSIRO research shows that it can reduce emissions by around 80%. The challenge we've got is how do we validate and I guess ensure that there's no risk, whether that's food safety, product quality, production system on farm, how you do that at scale. Pleasingly, it is going well. So we're now at the point where we're now looking to do that on multiple farms as we scale it up and effectively knock out any of the questions we've got all the way through to the carcass of the cows that are participating. The Tasmanian government is supportive of that program, last month announcing a $540,000 investment into Sea Forest, which will help and ensure that, as this gets proven up, we've got the opportunity to provide farmers with access to that at the front of the queue. The other piece that we've launched in a pilot last year, about this time last year, we kicked into this, was farm environmental plans. So again, this is about leveraging industry resources and taking them onto farm and supporting farmers to both understand and identify and measure areas of really good practice, but also areas where there's opportunity. We did 17 of those in Tasmanian farms in the last 12 months, and we'll continue to refine those and roll those out more broadly. And it's about that path to continual improvement. Things like nitrogen use, effluent efficiency, emissions and the like are part of those plans. Supporting those is then the farm source professional programs. So our team of people who again utilise Dairy Australia programs to support farmers in terms of action planning around their broader business, whether that's budgeting, agronomy, but particularly as the sustainability drivers come more front of mind. It's about giving farmers that pathway and support to implement those. So we do see a continuation of fantastic opportunity here in Tasmania, despite what's been a pretty challenging year for many in lots of ways, and a trend of or production that'll be sort of 7 or 8% off against that continued backdrop of growth. But as it goes forward, taking those meaningful steps to support farmers in our industry to be able to capitalise on that is very much part of our commitment. Thanks, Rowan.
Great, thanks for that, Matt. Next up, we'd like to hear from James.
Thanks, Rowan and Angelique and Matt. If we think of what Angelique's presented to us, she's talked about the vision of dairy down here in Tasmania as being adaptive, pasture-based industry that we're all proud of. And if we think of the mission, those 3 words that were, I suppose, highlighted, being adaptable, being profitable, and being sustainable. So in the context of that vision and mission, the TIA Livestock Production Centre's goal is really to improve the productivity and profitability of our livestock supply chains across Tasmania, whilst achieving positive social and environmental outcomes. So that's really our goal and our focus. And to achieve that, we've got 4 key research programs that we're working on. The first one of those is around sustainable use of inputs, particularly nitrogen and water, and I'll have a little bit of a discussion around that and the farmlet work that we're setting up that Rowan mentioned. The second of those is around redesigning the grass-fed system, and it's really looking at adapting our grass-fed livestock systems to meet the challenging societal needs in a way that respects both the animal welfare and the human well-being. And Megan will have a little bit of a talk about some of that in her talk just a little bit later. The other 2 programs, one of those is around building a resilient rain-fed pasture feed base, and that's probably more focused on our breeding side of things, and also the introduction of our legumes within those rain-fed pastures, and probably more applicable to our beef and our sheep industries. And then the 4th of those programs is around mitigating our greenhouse gases from our grass-fed systems, and Matt's talked a little bit about some of the work there. We're certainly connected in with some of that work around methane emissions and so forth in that system. So we won't talk so much about that. I think there was an update recently at the red meat updates, I think last week on both of those other systems. So I'll focus particularly on our sustainable input of nitrogen. And if we think about our pasture-based systems here in Tasmania, one of the strengths is the productivity and the efficiency of those systems and the profitability of those systems. Particularly if we think of our irrigated pasture-based systems down here, and certainly irrigation is expanding, our system for it to be very highly productive has relied on a very high level of nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen input. So typically 300 kilos or more of synthetic N, and so that has been very productive. But the challenge that we ask ourselves is this sustainable? We know that the cost of nitrogen has more than doubled, from say less than $1.50 per kilo of N up to more than $3, and so that certainly puts pressure on those industries. In addition to that, there's legislation in many parts of the world that is limiting the use of synthetic N to a maximum of around 190 to 200 kilos of N per hectare, and there is a significant risk that may impact on productivity of pasture-based systems here, as it has done in other places, so New Zealand and Europe in particular. And we want to be able to maintain our systems sustainably, as we've indicated, but also productively. So how do we address that? And I suppose what we're looking at here at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture at our upgraded facility is to see whether we can continue to achieve high pasture yields with a maximum of 150 kilos of N per hectare as synthetic N fertiliser. And the way that we're approaching this work is we're testing it in a farmlet system, because it really needs a system approach. Now, you can do small plot trials where you apply different amounts of nitrogen, have a look at it in isolation, but the farmlet approach, which is essentially where you set up a whole series of small farms to be able to test the whole system, you basically take the component work and you then introduce that into at a systems level. And so for us to be able to do that, to understand the impact of the reduction of nitrogen within those systems, we've had significant investment in our farm infrastructure. So the state government, along with the university, has invested over $7 million in TIA's farm infrastructure upgrades across the state, and there's about $5 million of that has actually been invested in our dairy research facility, and that's enabled us to put in a new dairy that'll handle multiple herds and to set up a whole series of replicated paddocks, so that we've got 32 hectares under new irrigation with 1 hectare paddock, so that we can run a number of different herds to test the particular systems that we're interested in for the benefit of the industry. So I suppose the key way in which we're looking at addressing the challenge of the nitrogen input story is to look at changing our pasture-based system from primarily a monoculture of ryegrass to mixed species. And the current project called Dairy High 2, so high integrity grass-fed herds, is a jointly funded project from Dairy Australia and TIA, $6.5 million over 5 years. And we're looking at introducing other species in addition to ryegrass to maintain productivity under low-end inputs. And some of the functional traits that we're looking at in terms of the introduction of other species is those that have improved end-use efficiency, obviously biological nitrogen fixation, some that have diuretic properties, some that are interactive and that are deep-rooted. So if we think of the way that we're approaching this work at the moment, there's 4 separate farmlets that we're setting up, 4 separate herds that we're going to be examining over the next 3 years. The first one of those is very much looking at our industry standard, where we have under irrigation a farmlet with 80% perennial ryegrass, 20% white clover, with 300 kilos of nitrogen. And so we'll be running that as our industry standard herd. And then we're going to be looking at that same mix of pasture composition with only 150 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. And then the third farmlet that we'll be running, the third herd, will be looking at introducing an increase in the legume component, and then also some herbs. So plantain is the herb that we're looking at there. And the reason that we're doing that is we're wanting to see an increase in the biological end fixation opportunity, because we're losing the opportunity with reduction of our synthetic end. But we also want to manage the bloat risk from the increased legumes within that system. And also plantain has some properties around the reduction of environmental nitrogen losses. So that's I suppose, the industry standard solution around our mixed species that we're going to be looking at that lower end input. There's a fourth farmlet that we're also going to be really focusing in on, which is looking at higher species diversity, so 9 different species. So a similar mix of grasses, legumes and herbs, 40% grasses, 30% legumes, 30% herbs, but increased number of species that look at the deep-rooted properties and other factors there. But the other thing about that particular farmlet is that we're changing completely the way in which we're introducing nitrogen into that system. So we're trying to minimise completely right down to a very low level the amount of nitrogen, and we're going to be focusing more on the supply of nitrogen for the not just for the plants, but for the health of the soil as well. So there's a real focus on the soil and the soil properties within that. And so we're working through how that's going to look like in terms of the inputs into that fourth farmlet. One of the other things that we're interested in is what impact that has on our product differentiation. So our mixed species, how does that impact the quality of our milk compared with something like our monoculture? So that's basically the focus that we've got for the work going forward in this particular area. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, James. Next up, if we can hear from Michele, that'd be great.
Well, thanks for inviting me to speak today. I am humbled to be asked to speak about how we're preparing for the future of dairy. When we live in a place long enough, we become attached to it, and we all love driving past an old school or our childhood home, and because we feel connected to it and we feel protective of it. And farming's no different. Farmers are in it for the long haul, for our businesses to be sustainable into the future, not just for us, but for our kids, our communities, and the generations to follow. At Janefield, we understand the role we play in the supply chain, and we understand the parts that we can control and the parts that we can influence. We can't control a natural disaster or the war in Ukraine, but we can control the relationships we establish with our industry, our suppliers, and our processors to ensure we have the information we need to plan ahead. and we can control how efficiently we use our resources. One of the things we pride ourselves on at Janefield is that efficiency. My husband Brian once said, I'm a grass farmer before I'm a dairy farmer, because grass production is one of the key drivers of profitability on our farm. Another one is fertility. So we invest a lot of time and energy in choosing genetics. So the word efficiency for our farm means minimal waste. Use our resources wisely. You need to understand your business and know what you can control and ensure it's nimble. So one of our strengths is that we can make decisions really quickly to maximise opportunities or to mitigate risk. Understanding our business, which I call having a plan, not only enabled us to keep operating in 2020-2021 after the death of Sophie, our daughter, it won us Dairy Business of the Year. So do not underestimate the power of a plan to profitability, because it can also be a guiding light when things go wrong and there's no energy left and you just go through the ropes on rote every day. We need to accept and manage risk and change. Don't let it manage you. We hear all the time that the average age of farmers is increasing, but the average age of people on our farm is about 30. So we have about 8 young people working on our farm now, between full-time and casual work. They're our future. Invest in them, train them, inspire them, and empower them. The year we won D-Boy was one with backpackers and new entrants, and with our AI tech by our side. Never underestimate the power of your plan, your policies, and your procedures to profitability and getting you through tough times. I must also mention the power of the dairy community who pulled us through that year. We underestimate the value of our regional community to successful businesses because they're not traditionally or easily measured alongside profitability. Equitable access to food is a global issue, and we can play a part in that. Globally, one of our biggest challenges is the long-term plan of how we're going to feed the number of people on the planet, ensuring food availability is equitable, not just for the wealthy. How are we taking care of the people, the animals, and the planet to meet both nutritional needs and the needs of the consumer, while ensuring we leave our environment in a better way than it is now? How do we measure the cost of not having an Australian dairy industry to nutrition and the environment? Knowledge is power. It gives us choice and it gives us a voice. Read widely, educate yourself, understand the path ahead, and be part of the change. Change is an ever-present part of farming, so don't be afraid to challenge your thinking always. We need to merge the intuitive knowledge and connectedness of farmers to their environment and production systems with science to address the challenges we face. Science bridges the gap between change and risk. Science gives us the confidence and know-how for change on farm. We need to remember that our current practices are informed by science, not by chance or whim or fancy, but by scientific evidence that we are looking after our land and our people and our animals and producing food the absolute best way we know how. It's through our partnerships with science and industry that we've refined, improved, or changed our practices around water, nutrient and energy efficiency, biotechnology so our feed base can withstand our changing climate. And through those partnerships, we're exploring genetics and calf pathways and innovative milking routines. We believe in supporting our industry by being involved, engaging in advocacy to ensure good policy, especially when it comes to having access to new technology, educating ourselves further, and creating relationships and networks. We use the term continuous improvement to describe the balance between change on farm and managing risk. I think one of the strengths of our dairy industry comes from its diversity of location, people, and production systems. But what we all have in common as an industry is a product we believe in. Dairy has and will continue to play a significant role in the diets of those who are able to enjoy its benefits. And that is something we must protect and we should all be proud of. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for that, Michelle. Next up, Megan.
Thanks, Rowan, and thanks for the opportunity. It's always hard going last, especially when you follow some really stimulating and excellent presenters with great ideas. So feeling pretty inspired. But today, I wanted to start my presentation by again highlighting something that's come up a bit today in this session, and that's the change in expectations of society and how food is produced. Now, at the crux of this is that the community grants social license when industries, and that's not just an agriculture industry, but all industries, and that includes my industry of research, behave in a manner that is consistent not just with their legal obligations, but also with community expectations. Now, the difficult thing is that the general community doesn't really understand the detail of what these industries do. What they seem to want is for industries to regulate themselves, but in a way that the community would if they did understand this detail. And the trust that they have that industries are doing this is given the term social license. Now, when this trust is breached, we generally see increased regulation and a loss of autonomy. In Australia in 2018, the federal government commissioned a report called the shift in mindset of Australians to farm animal welfare. And what this report found was that 95% of Australians view farm animal welfare to be a concern, and 91% wanted to see some reform to address this. Now, I'm just going to quote a Brisbane participant from a focus group that was detailed in this report. And this participant said that if animal welfare was regulated properly by the industry and the government, the consumer wouldn't have to make a choice. They would be ensured that the animal products they bought had good animal welfare standards. So the way I see my research is that it's a social license insurance scheme. So it monitors both national and global trends for changing social attitudes to farm animal welfare and looks to preempt any possible legislation changes by finding solutions to future and current challenges, but in a way where it can be practical and economically feasible for producers. Now, I think our work with dairy beef is a really good example of this. So I doubt it will be news to anyone in this audience that a dairy cow gives birth to a new calf each year, and that the male calves and the female calves that aren't needed as replacement stock are not used by the industry. And I'm going to call this group of calves surplus calves. Now, pure dairy breed calves grow less quickly and end up with less muscle than a beef calf. So these surplus calves haven't traditionally been seen as suitable for the red meat market. Now, that means that the cost of rearing these dairy surplus calves outweighs any financial return. And in Australia, most are slaughtered within the first few weeks of life. Now, going back to that report I mentioned earlier, there was a high level, and I'll quote the report, it says, outrage among respondents after they were informed of this practice. And it's now recognised both inside and outside the dairy industry as a social licence risk. Improving a calf quality to increase the value of surplus calves may help get some financial return and drive their utilisation. And one way that we can do this is by mating dairy cows with a beef bull rather than with a dairy bull, which improves calf growth rates as well as carcass quality. When using crossbreeding like this, however, we need to understand a bit more about which beef genetics to use on which cow, because there can be a risk of the calf being too big to get out safely. And this results in a difficult calving and also increases the risk of stillbirth and health issues for the cow. And this is something TIA is currently exploring with the support of Dairy Australia. We can add further value to crossbred calves by meeting the requirements of programs such as the Greenham's Dairy Beef Program. One of the requirements of this program is that calves are provided a grain-free starter pellet. And we recently ran a trial at TIA, which was supported by Greenham's and Dairy Australia, to see how this specific requirement affected the growth of crossbred calves. And we found no evidence of a difference in calf weights when fed a typical grain-based or a grain-free starter pellet. Now, we did have some health issues with these calves along the way, so we're currently repeating the trial on our spring-born calves, just so we can confirm these results. Finally, ensuring that calf rearing aligns with best practice in terms of colostrum feeding and milk volumes, and also the identification and treatment of sick calves can act to improve calf value by reducing deaths and improving growth again. Now, we are seeing pretty good uptake of dairy beef in Tasmania, which I think is an excellent example of the adaptability of Tasmanian dairy producers. And I think that this adaptability will help the Tasmanian dairy industry lead Australia and even the world in terms of farming practices that deliver to the 3 pillars of sustainability, and that is the people, the environment, and the animals involved. And this could be the industry that the world points to in the future as the example of how well sustainable farming can be done. Thanks, Rowan.
Great. Thanks, Megan. And thanks to all the presenters. Now we'll just launch into some of the questions. So there's a few coming through. Firstly, the first question is for James. What plant species would you be using in nitrogen fixation in your work? There's a few questions within this question. So that's the first part.
Yeah, okay. So in the farmlet work itself, so the first 3 farmlets are looking at our conventional system of a ryegrass with white clover. So we have our high end input or our lower end input. In the third farmlet, we're looking at continuing the use of white clover, but introducing plantain, and the white clover will be at a 30% rather than 20%. So that's the focus in the 3 more commercial farmlets. In the fourth farmlet, the legumes there will continue to be clovers, but we'll be looking at a mix of red, strawberry, and white clover within that mix. So that's currently for the farmlet work.
That launches perfectly into the next part of the question. Will you be comparing the different species in terms of their nitrogen fixation, and how are you going to measure that in the soil? Okay,
so there is another research program that sits on top of this farmlet program that we're currently designing and working with Dairy Australia and the University of Melbourne on, which is looking at more the soil side of things, and we're hoping to have a postgraduate student that will actually look at some of these factors. Obviously, we'll be measuring nitrogen, the whole cycle of nitrogen within each of the systems. The ways of doing it specifically with regard to the different fixes, there are isotope ways and so forth, but we probably haven't got the detail of what that might look like with some of our student projects today. But if anyone wants to have a talk to us about some of that as we develop that up, certainly be very happy to talk to them about it.
Just a separate question quickly while you're on a roll, James. Red clover, do they have a future in Tasmania?
That's a good question. I probably need to defer that to someone like Rowan, who's been breeding all that side of things.
Yep.
Certainly not used as widely, but yeah, potentially, I'm not sure yet.
We can follow that up. We'll move away from James. Matt, from your experience, what does a customer conversation around sustainability look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Ryan. I mean, I think the start point for us is what is a customer? It's a pretty broad term. For us, it ranges from consumers, buying Duck River or Western Star or Perfect Italiano, whatever it is, through to a Bellamy's, taking an organic infant formula product, and then customers in, say, the food service market, buying cheese to put on hamburgers or salad rolls or whatever that happens to be. Increasingly, the ambitions are interesting, but the evidence points are where they're starting to go. So what we're starting to see is say, well, look, get that 2050 net zero, you've got that, so most people, and we support that ambition. But tell me what you've done already. Show me evidence of the things that you've done and actually completed. And that's where kind of the judgment starts to come in, frankly. The idea that you've got nice ambitions is good, but you need to be able to demonstrate that you've actually made a move. Now, there's not an expectation out there that you've resolved everything. I think most customers that we deal with and most consumers would say, look, we know the full range of answers aren't resolved, but what you do need to be able to do is demonstrate a commitment to a pathway. I think Michele used the term of continuous improvement. It's the same with sustainability. You've got to be able to demonstrate that. And it actually comes back to things like to what we call 1%ers. If I think about inside plant, the investment we made in Wynyard, it's now 100,000 litres of water a day more efficient. Sprayton, we've done work on energy use and how we better wire the energy and sort of metering. Now, all of those things are little things, but as you add them up, there's a list of over 100 initiatives that we're churning our way through. And they're the sort of things that customers go, well, actually, we can see you committed, we can see your way through. And I think the final comment I'd make on that, and sort of was interesting hearing Megan speak, is in many cases, customers don't know what they don't know, but what they're looking for is for you to provide assurance to them that you know it and you've got it and you're addressing it. And if you can do that credibly and successfully and not complacently, I think it does put dairy more generally, and particularly out of a place like Tasmania with its natural attributes, in a really good space.
Great, thanks for that. We've got a question from Megan next up. Sex semen in Tasmania. What are your thoughts? Does it have a place in the dairy beef system?
Great question, and I probably should have covered this a bit. Our perspective is yes, that perhaps the potential, so crossbreeding is good, but you still need to get your dairy heifer replacements out of your herd. So one way of doing that is using sex semen on your the best genetics that you want to carry on in your herd to get your heifer replacements, and then on the remaining crossbreed them. One of the issues that we see with sex semen is while if you use sex semen, you're 90% and the cow becomes pregnant, you're 90% sure that that animal is going to be a female. There is a reduced chance that that cow will become pregnant at all with sex semen. And what we're finding is that there's quite a bit of variability year to year between farms in how much success they have with sex semen. So I think there's still some work around that in terms of improving the technology, and potentially by sharing our stories, we may be better positioned to understand what does and doesn't work specifically with sex semen. But my perspective is, yeah, it has a big role. And thanks for bringing it up, David, because I should have touched on that.
Great, thanks for that. Next question is for Angelique. It was mentioned that people was the #1 priority in the strategic plan. Other industries are looking closely at soft skills and technology influences for the future of their work. And dairy has invested a lot into upskilling employers around the change for the family farm to corporate. And it's seen this technology come in with mixed success. Has dairy looked into the soft skills and technology influences on their industry, or is there some expertise that we might be able to pull in from other industries somehow?
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for the question. So I guess there's probably two parts to that question: soft skills and technology. And I can't give you any specifics in terms of has there been incredible amounts of research into either of those topics and how that's influencing the people that are available for employment, and how we skill those people in the future. But both certainly are acknowledged in pretty much every conversation that I have. I know Dairy Australia has done some work around technology, and if you look at the industry 5-10 years ago, robotics was certainly the way that people thought the industry would go in terms of reducing the number of employees required on farm. And the uptake of that has not been what I guess the industry thought, and for various reasons. But there's also an acknowledgement that in putting robotics or putting increased technology into dairy, we still need people. And there are some jobs that we just need people to do. And that includes actually looking after the technology on farm. In terms of soft skills, definitely it is discussed all the time. And it's probably, when you think of the people that have really good records in terms of employment history on farms, and have long-term employees or have grown their teams, as Michele has spoken about, it's often the soft skills that make those people the employers of choice. And it's also something that's asked for. So DairyTas certainly, as mentioned in the question, has certainly upskilled people in terms of actual skills that are required on farm. And those people who have done those courses or have got those skills to actually now run farms are actually coming back and saying they need the soft skills now to continue into the future. And so that's certainly something that at DairyTas we're looking at in terms of providing those pathways and those courses for those people. And I think it's a good acknowledgement. It's something that that all industries are probably looking at the moment, and we're not alone in that.
Very good. We've got a question here from Michele. You talked about the value of science. How do you cut through the hype that's sometimes seen out there? And how do you make sure that the advice or the technology is sound and evidence-based? Any advice?
I guess what we do is one of the first things we do is we try and have good relationships with people such as, I guess, people at TIA, industry people, and that helps us have an understanding what's out there. The second thing we do is we like pre-competitive advice. So we make sure that the advice that we're getting is pre-competitive, and we do go back to the original research articles and investigate those. We look at multiple sources. We read widely, cross-country, and then we inform ourselves. But we don't make change quickly. We do consider carefully what we're going to change for the future.
Very good. Another question here from Megan. Do you believe what the consumer sees as a sustainable practice aligns with what we as farmers see as sustainable and achievable?
It's a good question. Probably not, to be honest. And yeah, so I think that that they probably don't. I mean, they don't understand the detail of what you guys do. They don't understand how difficult it is. They don't understand the complexities. They don't understand that you're out there for 14 or 15 hours a day and calving in horrible weather and pulling all that off. They have no idea. I mean, often they don't even, they conflate issues. I'll just say that. So in terms of things like cow-calf separation and dairy beef issues, they consider them as one, which I think just kind of shows how that they don't understand. So there are differences there, and I think that the challenge is that they are still they're stakeholders in this. They are buying your product and they are involved with the social license thing. So we need to find some sort of way where we're able to talk to them and consider what they see as sustainable, talk to producers and find out what is actually practical and kind of get some common ground in the middle there. So some things just that the consumers want may never be practical, but is there something that we can do that will meet them halfway, that they will find acceptable? I mean, there is a risk that we see in my industry that if we just develop something that meets the consumer expectations, then it's never used on farm and it doesn't change anything. On the other hand, if we just develop something that meets the industry needs and we never take it to consumers and say, is this acceptable alternative for you, then it never takes off either. So there are lots of really good researchers at the moment looking at different models where we can consider the perspectives of the industry, the perspectives of the consumers or the general public. They don't even have to be consumers to be involved in social license, and get that two-way interaction happening. And it is challenging. I get that, especially as we see a public that's more and more distant from where their food is actually coming from. So that's a really big question, and I think we could probably have a whole separate forum just talking about that. But it's there's some of the big questions that we do think about.
Very good. And do you think encouraging young people, I know, Michele, you're talking about the average age on your farm. How do you think we get that going? Is it through schools or, what's the best way, do you think? I know you're a teacher as well at certain times.
I was a teacher. Yeah, look, I definitely think getting that message out into schools is really, really important. One of the strategies we've taken to hiring people is, I haven't advertised in a long time. I looked at the number of people out there advertising, and I looked at the number of responses that we were receiving from advertising positions, and we've actively sort people who are looking to work. So we'll do that by for social media. We have our staff seek other people. We've created relationships with local schools, and that's how we've managed to get our current employee group. And yeah, we do have about 8 young people at the moment, which brings its own challenges, but they're so much fun to work with. And I must say, going back to another point about the technology, all of our young people, being that they're 21 and under, are actually really enjoying the thrill of the hard skills. We do have some technology here on farm too, but they actually enjoy working with the animals, working outdoors. The smiles on their faces today when the paddocks are flooding and the challenge of learning, to take tractors through muddy paddocks, they actually enjoy that thrill as well. So there's got to be a balance between both sets of skills.
Great. And just to circle back on that previous question to Megan, I think Matt's got a little bit of perspective around aligning, what's achievable and then also what the consumer expects.
Thanks, Rowan. I touched earlier around the farm environmental plans, which is about sort of how do we start to put a plan that supports farmers in terms of their ambitions on farm. The generation of those plans is really important in terms of we kind of see ourselves as almost the scale in the middle, balancing the expectations, some of them realistic today, some of them may be realistic in a decade, and some of them unrealistic of consumers and customers, and also the practical realities on farm. And again, if we think about what we consider reasonable in farming practice today versus 20 years ago, that's also shifted. What we're able to do is use sort of the deep partnerships we have with customers and consumers through research and also direct relationships to inform that, and where they're sort of, where they're hot buttons versus, less important issues are. And similarly back into the farm base, we use our suppliers council, for example, heavily to say, well, these are the sorts of things, what are the modules, where should they go, how should we focus on it? But ultimately, again, I'll restate, it's a continuous improvement journey, as opposed to sort of saying, well, this is what I can do, this is what you want. The two things are different. I think we do have to just think about this as a continuation, and provided we're vulnerable enough to say, look, we haven't got all the answers and there's some things we'd like to do, but we can't yet. I think that's okay. And I think we also need to ground ourselves in, certainly in terms of the philosophy in our business, that sustainability generally makes good business sense. If you're attacking the things that makes your business more efficient, and a few of the speakers have spoken about that in the long run will be good for farmers in the same way that it's good for our business.
Great. I've got another question here. I might put this to Angelique. I know that you farm in the Northwest. How do dairy farmers attract people to their farms when accommodation is scarce and petrol prices are soaring? That sort of geographical limitation and the challenge in that.
Yeah, thanks, Rowan. I guess certainly accommodation is identified regularly as an issue in terms of attracting a workforce to farms, and that's not just an issue in Tasmania, that's an issue across Australia. And there certainly has been some work done in terms of some of the regions in Australia that are particularly challenged by lack of accommodation. And thanks for pointing out that I'm from Circular Head, Rowan, but Circular Head rates fairly highly in those surveys in terms of unavailability of accommodation. It's certainly a challenge. I'm not sure that there's an easy fix to that. And we're not the only industry that's being affected by lack of accommodation. So the northwest coast of Tassie is certainly one of those areas that in terms of skilled and unskilled labour is finding difficulty in attracting people because of accommodation. In terms of petrol prices, I guess we're all affected by that as well. Some of that probably comes back to that previous question around those soft skills and those employers of choice. And I guess it's about making sure that staff are paid well enough that it's meeting those costs and those needs that may be associated with that. I guess, if you particularly live out of town, being aware that, sometimes to attract people and to retain those people, we need to make sure that their working conditions are what they would like to have every day when they come to work. I don't think there's an easy solution to any of those. And in terms of accommodation, I think that's probably a community the solutions for that will be community-based. So we need to, I think, across sectors, look at the accommodation issue together.
Great, thanks for that. We might just circle back on the red clover comment. We've just got a comment here from Rowan, who's one of our researchers here at TIA, and he says, in terms of red clover's fit in dairy systems, I see it as a companion to white clover in mixed irrigated pastures, and also driving production in rain-fed runoff areas that may become moisture stressed, where white clover may not persist. Breeding in the last 20 years has made a significant gains in the grazing tolerance of red clovers. Righto. If there's any more questions, we might sort of wrap it up there. But thank you all for your time. Again, thanks to all the presenters. There's no more questions coming through. To find out any more information about the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture and our upcoming events, please subscribe to our newsletter. You can access that through the UTAS and TIA website, which is in the chat. There is a final poll that's just gone up. If you could answer that, that'd be great. Thanks.